Hi, welcome. I'm Stephen Carson, and this is Heather Carson, coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States. We skipped a month, but we're back to doing our monthly Mrs. RadLib stream. Um, in fact, the reason we missed this is not entirely unrelated to the topic of today's show. Um, we had a family vacation, but before that, I went to England and I spoke at a conference with Academic Agent and other friends. And the subject of my talk was really about movements, about how to have a successful movement. And I uh, discussed that by talking about early Christianity and the Roman Empire, which, in my view, succeeded. Started as an extremely small movement coming from a backwater of the empire, and within a couple hundred years, the Roman emperor had to reluctantly acknowledge that we're going to have to get along with these people because there are so many of them, and they're so successful in the Roman Empire. And so what I went through in my talk was how the early Christian movement did that. And one of the themes had to do with attachments. A lot of the talk was really drawing from sociology of religion. Just didn't use that in the title because that would make people think it was boring when in fact they really enjoyed the talk. One of the points in sociology of religion is when people join a new religion, and of course Christianity in the context of the Roman Empire was a new religion, right? It wasn't a return to the old Roman, Greco-Roman gods. It was something entirely different. And when people join a new religion, a common pattern is that I'm distracted by the out of focus camera. There we go. Okay. A common pattern is that people join the new religion when more of their attachments, their bonds, are people who are in the new religion than people who are outside of it. And so I described in some detail how that worked out with early Christianity. How is it that they kept on changing the attachment network such that people found themselves now more connected to Christians and less connected to pagans? And this process kept going and going until Christians, within something like 350 years after the birth of Christ, dominated the Roman Empire, which is quite remarkable, really. Anyway, Heather hasn't seen my talk. I'm waiting for the Lotus Eaters crew, who production crew who taped it, to get me a copy of that so I can share it with my wife. So she didn't know that today's theme really fit in a very complementary way to what I talked about in England. So that is why in the marketing for this, I talked about what we'll focus on, to be fair, bonds between parent and child, bonds between spouses, bonds between friends. But I also slipped in bonds within a movement because I was thinking about what I said in my talk. And I think that you will find that even though for a while Heather's going to be talking about like babies and stuff and things that happen when you're 6 months old, it's going to become clear to you how everything we're talking about applies not only to parent, it certainly applies to parent and child, no question, but it sets a template for how we relate, how we bond for the rest of our lives. It is helpful to be aware of these different kinds of bonds, to understand which kinds of bonds are better kinds of bonds, and try to move towards them. One of the things, Heather, right, with this sort of stuff is you can end up feeling a little bit, you have to be careful. It can end up feeling a little bit fatalistic, like, because my first 9 months were like this, and left me with, a difficulty with bonding, then I'm doomed for the rest of my life. And that's not really your message, right? The point is to be aware of the different kinds of bonds so that you can recognize what it is and go, oh, okay, I attach to other people like this, and maybe I can have some insight as to why. And now that I'm aware of it, I can maybe do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where these things are, it's you start with realism as usual, right? The reality is these are the different kinds of bonds. You learn about this today from Heather. You recognize yourself in it. But that is just to sort of ground you in reality and not leave you stuck there.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to leave anyone stuck.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So step one is just be real. Be real about your bonding style. But then step two is you might decide that bonding style that maybe you just kind of were given before you were conscious to even know,
Mm-hmm.
right? It just happened to you, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You might not want to stay with that bonding style.
Right.
And you have choices. You have things you can do about it, right? Okay, so with that context, shall we go to your notes?
Yeah, well, let me just begin by saying the reason that I chose to do a follow-up, because what this really is a follow-up to our previous discussion where we talked about society and sex and Christian sexual ethics. And I had a lot of questions after the discussion about bonding and just people wanting more information about attachment and how relationships are formed and just the long-term impact of the way that people acquire their particular attachment style. And so today's discussion is not going to be a super lengthy one. This is work that I've been researching for decades. And so I'm kind of just summarizing that for you a little more fully, and then trying to kind of make some connections in terms of the different attachment styles and then how we live those out in our life. So that's kind of what I'm looking to do today. I should say that Stephen's gift from traveling was COVID.
Right. Not only me, a number of others at the conference were sick after the conference.
So I, to myself, sound still a bit nasally, though I'm out of sort of the quarantine period. And I hope I don't start coughing still or anything. So anyway, and I'm also just kind of have some brain fog and fatigue that I'm still dealing with. So anyway, this is going to be a shortened Mrs. Radlib discussion, but I just didn't, given that we took a month off, I wanted to kind of just jump in and get something going, further to just the discussion a little bit. So having said that, I always like to begin a discussion with just defining terms, because I think that kind of lays the groundwork for things. So the first term I wanted to define was bonding. What is bonding? Bonding is the act of establishing a relationship based on shared feelings and experiences. In the case of an infant, it's the shared experience of being nurtured and nurturing. Learning about feelings, being fed, touching. You're as a new mother spends a great deal of time physically in contact with her baby, gazing at her baby, eye to eye, skin to skin, all those kinds of things. It's a primal, pre-verbal kind of bond that starts with when you're first born, and it is essential for growth and development on every single level. So one of the studies that I recall from my undergrad work it's a very famous study of infants that had been orphaned after World War II, and these infants were fed and they had their diapers changed, but they were not touched and cuddled and talked to and otherwise stimulated on an emotional and psychological level and physical level, and they died.
Right.
So
to be more straightforward about it,
mm-hmm.
they didn't have bonds.
They didn't, yeah, there was no
They,
bonding
no,
happening.
there just weren't enough caregivers or whatever, and so
Right.
they were not forming bonds. And it
Right.
turns out that everyone needs bonds
Hmm. Hmm.
at every stage of life, which we'll get to.
Yes.
But when you're an infant, then you will literally die from a lack of bond.
Absolutely. So this idea, and this is something that I heard from kind of my grandparents and even parents' generation, if the child is fed and the diapers changed, then, what are they crying for? Like, what do they need?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really, I don't know if they were just, I don't know. I never really understood that because clearly they were giving their children more than that.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So I don't really understand.
yeah.
But
Their behavior was not necessarily
reflective
yeah,
of that.
it would make it sound like literally they'd feed you and then just lock you in a room or something.
Right.
That's not
And,
what was happening.
but I think there was this stigma against spoiling
Yes.
children, from my parents and grandparents.
Yeah,
Like, this
yeah.
was the ultimate parental sin.
Yeah, I want to comment on that because I think that this is something where we have seen pushback in regards to some of the parenting choices we've made in terms of homeschooling, but even with younger children, things like co-sleeping,
Right.
Nursing for beyond a couple weeks. Um, right. These are to some degree unusual choices in America, at least.
Right.
I don't know that even in Europe, all these choices are unusual. I think they nurse longer in some parts of Europe. But anyway, we made some choices that in America were a bit countercultural. And a very common objection is that we were going to spoil our children. They were getting too much attention.
Right.
And we're talking about like a 3-month-old.
Right.
Your
Right.
3-month-old is getting too much attention from you. And they are going to, well, it's funny because they would predict what is, in fact, the opposite of what bonding
Correct.
theory is going to teach us.
Correct.
They predicted that a child that is being nursed, is being held a lot, is sleeping with you at night when they're very little, etc., etc. That child is going to be clingy for the rest of their life. That is, they're going to need to continue to be close to you as they mature.
Right.
That's actually the opposite of the truth,
Right.
which is what we'll be discussing exactly how that works out. But anyway,
Exactly. So this early bonding is what we call a primary attachment bond. Okay. The bond that forms with our very first caregivers, usually one's parents, initially the mother. But it can be a nanny or another person who is just the one who is
a grandma.
right.
Yeah.
If that person is most responsive to the baby's needs because they are in the position of caregiver all day long, then that person is going to be a primary attachment. And babies can have more than one. We often there's often kind of the main person, often the mother, but then there's secondary attachment, which is dad, or any other extended family whom they have very regular contact with, is going to be part of that attachment circle.
Now, just since we're defining it, primary attachment is also used for spouses when you're grown up.
It is, and I'll get into that later on.
We'll explain that. But
exactly,
yeah, primary
but-
attachment is not solely baby and mother or baby and nanny.
Right.
It is also used in other contexts, and you'll
Actually,
you'll
it's
get to
only
that.
used in the one other context,
Oh,
and that's the spouse.
wow.
So just let that sit in the back of your mind for a minute there.
Yeah.
So,
Heavy.
okay. So,
Do you want to turn to this article, Heather?
yeah.
Because actually,
yeah.
we're going to be able to see it just fine. Because I'm going
Okay.
to go to this screen, and it'll be right in
Alright.
front of us.
Okay, awesome. Steven's doing
Oh,
the
I see.
thing. Okay, so several years ago,
10 years ago.
Oh my gosh, 10 years ago, I wrote an article titled, "Is Your Baby a Good Baby?" This was a question that I had asked of me quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it's along the same lines of, is your baby spoiled? Okay, it's kind of the same deal. And the idea is that if you're holding your baby too much, if you're giving your baby too much, you're going to reinforce the crying and their neediness. Okay, and
Right.
it's total BS.
Yeah, it's like
okay?
a simplistic Pavlovian
Yeah,
attempt
right.
to explain it.
Right.
Basically, if your child cries and you go to them, and try to figure out what their need is and meet their need, then you're teaching them that crying gets them what they want, and so they will cry more.
Right.
Right? You can see the logic of it. It's just wrong.
It's just wrong.
It's just incorrect.
Yeah. So one of the hot topics with parents and I guess a battleground regarding attachment and how we deal our babies is the issue of infant sleep. And so I wanted to kind of tackle this briefly in this article because this is something that became, well, it has been and still is a controversial issue. I think that pediatricians are starting to begin to steer away from these kinds of recommendations, but not all of them. So the basic idea is this idea of cry it out, that if we can train our babies to basically not need us during certain times of the day, preferably at night, so that you can get some sleep. But it kind of bleeds into other parts of the day as well. But I kind of address the whole cry it out thing at night. And, the reason that this is such a controversial issue is because it emphasizes this idea that babies are physiologically developed enough to be able to hold the concept as well as the visual idea of their primary caregiver inside their brain while they're not there. And the reality is that that sort of awareness doesn't happen until much, much later in a child's development. Okay. So the reason that attachment is so important, this idea of attachment bonds is so important, is because the way that we respond to our baby is absolutely key and crucial in terms of how they develop what kind of attachment. Okay. So if you want to scoot up on the article just a little bit, and I'll just kind of use this as an intro. So, and then I need my outline as well, so I kind of know what to. Okay.
Go to that.
So
let's go to it in the article so it can be on the screen.
Thank you. Stephen is helping me out here. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So this is where you were planning to start.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Okay. So what we're talking about when we talk about attachment bonding is based on attachment theory. And it's simply this, that all infants become attached to the person with whom they interact most often, which is what I've already said, usually the mother, second the father. And this attachment takes several different forms, two main forms. Children can develop a secure attachment or they develop an insecure attachment. Okay. And a secure attachment is formed when mom and dad are responsive to baby consistently. Okay. Baby cries, baby is picked up, baby is soothed in some way. And part of this responsiveness is something that is very important, which is called attunement. Okay. So, if you ask a mom who is responsive to her baby, she has been really leaning into bonding with her baby, and she is attuned with her baby, she can distinguish between what cry means what with her babies. But other people may not be able to do that. But a mom and dad who are attuned to their baby and who have been responsive to their baby are able to do that. Moms who are responsive to their infant's cues for hunger know that when a baby is crying, this is a very late indication that hunger has been happening. Usually early signs of hunger are when a baby starts to root around with their mouth because they're looking for food.
They don't cry first.
They do not cry first. That's a very late sign of hunger. A baby can tell you when they're going to go to the bathroom because they kind of start to wriggle their abdomen around and kind of grunt and act uncomfortable. And just to really, fly the freak flag, I'm just gonna go and tell you that with one of our kids, I got interested in this whole idea of EC, or elimination communication. And I started to do, you can look it up, elimination communication. And so I started to do this with our fourth born. And basically, I was so attuned with him that I was able to know when he needed to go to the bathroom. And so I would remove his diaper and take him to the bathroom, and he would go. I would hold him over the potty and he would actually go in the potty. I think I changed very few soiled diapers in the first like 9 or 10 months of his infant life.
Right.
Because
It requires a lot of focus and a lot of time with the child.
well, I was just, yeah, I was home with him and so anyway, that's kind of on another level. And it didn't last. Once he got to be about 10 months old, he was too busy crawling and learning to walk to be interested in having me hold him to go to the potty.
Right.
So it kind of got hijacked by just his own interest in the world. But anyway, so, one of the reasons, so a secure attachment, we have, we're meeting the baby's needs consistently. We're attuned with our baby. And this, you don't have to be breastfeeding to be attuned to your baby. You can be bottle feeding to be attuned, and this attunement and this responsiveness develops into a secure attachment. Okay. An attachment is said to be secure when the caregiving is responsive. And a secure attachment or bond is responsible for regulating all the bodily and emotional functionings of a baby. Okay. They simply cannot do this themselves. One of the reasons that we chose to, for example, co-sleep with our baby, keep the babies right near me, is that my presence next to the baby helped regulate the baby's heart rate, breathing, body temperature. I could immediately respond when baby was showing signs of hunger, rather than needing to get up, go in the other room where the baby's in a completely separate room from me. By then the baby's crying and totally in distress and is going to take, longer to calm down.
Right.
With the baby right with me, I was able to immediately meet the baby's needs. Okay, so children who develop this secure attachment show distress when they're separated. That's completely normal. Okay. So there's something that, what do we call it? Separation anxiety is something that I hear, that I heard a lot when kids were, we were having babies and around a lot of moms and babies. But the reality is that babies who are securely attached to their children and are not being separated unnecessarily from their parents don't generally have any anxiety, because they only separate to a level that they're comfortable, But when they are separated too long or too far, they'll show distress. And then they have relief and, joy when they're reunited with the mom. Now, although the child may be upset, they get reassured when the caregiver returns to them. When they're scared, securely attached children are comfortable seeking reassurance from the mom, from the dad, And this truly is the most common attachment style. Most kids, the majority of children, are going to fall, in this secure attachment area, And I just want to say, because I think there's a lot of fear of like, oh no, I ruined my baby because I let them cry a little bit, or I didn't get to them soon enough, or, something like that. That's not true. If you're a good enough mom, then your child will develop a secure attachment. We're not looking for perfection here, so.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the lesson here is not to get people all anxious, right? Where I'm like, I need to, break my leg racing to my baby, right?
Right.
You want to be calm. I mean, that's one of the main things your baby picks up from you, is that everything's okay. I'm here. I'll be right there. I'm taking care of you. Your needs will be met.
Yes.
They might not be met, when you snap your fingers, but they will be met.
Yeah.
Right. So that calm is what the baby's absorbing, and that their needs are being met.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So it shouldn't be a source of anxiety. I don't think, though, that it's such a problem if what you pick up from this is that it's important for the mom to have time with the little baby.
Absolutely.
I think that's just correct, as inconvenient as it is. And as much as our society is trying to structure everything to make it hard to do that, right? So I noticed somebody was saying that companies are funding travel for abortions while they
Mm,
cut down on maternity leave, you
right.
know, because it's cheaper to pay for the abortion than to fund the mom being home with their baby, you know.
Right.
So, I see forces in our society that have been there for some decades now pushing against mom and new baby having time together. But I think this research, which by the way is not like, this is not from like conservatives or Christians or
No.
something.
No.
What Heather's teaching us here is basically standard issue understanding of how bonding works,
Exactly.
right? So
Yeah.
this is not like radical fringe stuff. This is
No.
actually super mainstream. It's just that our society is sick and doesn't structure itself in a way
Hmm.
that takes into mind what we're talking about here.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. You
Even
do.
though if you went to any pediatrician, anybody who, or any psychologist, child development psychologist, you ask them, is it important for the baby and the mother to have time together so that the
Hmm.
mother can meet the baby's needs? They'd say, oh yeah, of course it is.
Absolutely. It's
I
kind
don't
of a
know,
no. It's common sense. It's a
yeah, yeah,
no-brainer.
right,
But for some reason, it isn't common sense anymore.
right, right.
Because we've really had a complete breakdown of family and extended family structure. And, I mean, I was basically home alone with my children. And, I'm grateful to Stephen. I mean, he was right on board with being the breadwinner so that I could be the one to stay home with our children.
Right.
But it was very lonely. I had very little support. I did not have extended family support.
Yeah.
And
Made it harder.
it
Yeah.
made it harder. It made it a lot harder on me. Okay. Which then made it harder in general with the children.
Right. And that's another takeaway for folks, I think, is that if you can support, husbands support your
Right.
wives being with their new children, their new babies. The baby really needs it,
Right.
and also I think there's other ways that we can support each other, right? Like uh, new moms spending time together so that
Absolutely.
you're not totally alone.
Yes. And that was
Um,
something that I did.
family, if you've got
Yeah.
siblings who just had a new baby,
Hmm.
see what you can do to help support them, especially in that crucial like 6 to 9 months right after the birth is so challenging,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. So so before we move on to insecure attachment, I want to flesh this out a little bit more, and I'm going to be drawing from a book.
Yeah. Actually,
That,
Heather, we don't need to be on this article, right? I want you to show the book and people will be
Yeah,
able to see
I might
it.
come back to the article, but
Okay,
if I
we
do,
can
I
come
can
back.
come back
We
to
can come
that.
back.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
show them
I'm
that
gonna
book.
just draw a little bit from this book because he had some really good stuff on attachment, and I just love the book, and I wanted to share it with you. This is called "The Body Keeps the Score." It's by Bessel van der Kolk, which is quite a name.
Sounds like a Dutch name.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, why is this important? Like, why is this even important? Whoops, there's my bookmark. Why is it even important for us to be talking about this? And I want to just flesh it out a little bit so that you can really understand why this is so important. So, what have I said so far? I've said that, but mother and baby need to be attuned. And this attunement and closeness, physical closeness, emotional closeness, helps baby regulate heart rate, hormone levels, okay, stress in any human being, and babies included, because they're human beings, results in an increase of cortisol in the brain, the stress hormones. Okay, so having being in sync emotionally leads to being in sync physically. Okay, you'll be able to respond more easily, more quickly to your baby's needs. Okay, and this responsiveness leads to a secure attachment, but it goes further than that. Okay, babies who are soothed, newborns who are soothed, are more responsive to learning how to manage higher levels of arousal as they get older. Okay, so learning how to manage stimuli, coming at you, is kind of a key life skill. And this is something that we as parents are responsible to teach our kids. When they fall and they get a scrape on their knee, how do we respond to that? If a baby falls down while trying to walk, do we freak out, or do we say, oops, you fell, let's stand back up and try it again? I mean, they are learning key ways to be in the world from us, you know? And if we have a mother who is non-responsive, who is ignoring their child, then they're not going to be able to learn that. So when children have intense sensations, so hunger is a really intense sensation for a new baby. Okay. It's like they feel it with their whole body. They don't have a verbal way to articulate this. The need for closeness is an intense sensation. Having to go to the bathroom, these are all intense sensations. When we begin to associate these intense kinds of sensations with safety and comfort, and gaining a sense of mastery over it. You know, for example, as early as I could, I taught my children to ask for more using signs, more, so that they could start to gain control over when they were given something to eat. So they might say like this, and then they might sign more. And I would say, oh, do you want some food? You want more food? And so then they had control over their environment. So all these things, Vander Kolk says, I'm just going to read real quick. A secure attachment combined with the cultivation of competency builds an internal locus of control, which is the key factor in healthy coping throughout our whole life. Securely attached children learn what makes them feel good. They discover what makes them and others feel bad. They acquire a sense of agency. They learn that their actions can change how they feel and how others will respond to them. Securely attached kids learn the difference between situations that they can control and situations where they need help. So a child who is securely attached will come and ask for help if they need help, you know, because they know they can trust their parent to respond to them. Okay. So all of this is just building the relationship, the bond between the parent and child. They also learn that they can play an active role when faced with difficult situations. In contrast, children with histories of abuse and neglect learn that their terror and their pleading and crying do not register with the caregiver. Okay, nothing they can do or say stops the abuse or the neglect. In effect, they're being conditioned to give up when they're faced with later challenges in life. So with that, let's go to insecure attachments.
Oh, wait a sec. I thought a great comment here from A.
Oh.
Walrus. He says that moment when the child looks to you before deciding whether or not to cry.
Yeah.
Right? That's really, really good. I've experienced that.
Yeah. I mean, when a child is really hurt and they're really hurting, they're just going to cry.
Right.
But sometimes they're like looking at you like, what do I do? How should I respond?
Should I be freaked out by what just happened?
Right. I just fell on my bum. Should I freak out or, you know, something like that?
Yeah. And I just wanted to say one more thing before we leave the secure attachment, which is, you know, I think we're really focused on reading, writing, arithmetic when we think about teaching, right? What do we teach our children, right? We teach them how to read and, you know, that sort of thing. But what this brings home is that the first things you teach your children are more basic and deeper and fundamental. It's how do I respond to stress? How do I handle when I have a need? We think of these things as maybe something that a child would just know how to do, but you might be thinking of like baby horses or something. Baby humans actually are not like that.
Right.
Right. There's baby animals that are pretty functional, like they're born and they're like walking around and
I
they're
think a good
finding
example,
food, right?
A good example
and
of this is birds.
Yeah, go ahead. Birds. Yeah.
So birds, there's two different types. You have precocial birds. Precocial birds are chickens, ducks, geese. You know, they're born knowing how to scratch and peck and drink and eat. You know, when I go to the feed store and I buy a dozen baby chicks, I don't have to teach them how to get the food. They already know how to get the food. They're born, you know, damp, but they fluff out really quickly. They need heat and to be provided food and water, but I don't have to like sit with them and, you know, babysit them. And then there's the other kind, which I believe the word is altrul. There's precocial and altrul. I think that's, which basically is like baby robins and songbirds. They're born naked. They are completely dependent on the parents. And if the parents aren't there, it's very likely that the baby bird is not going to survive.
Right.
When you bring a baby bird that's fallen out of a nest to a songbird sanctuary, the chances of it surviving are actually not very good. So, you know.
That kind of bird.
That kind of bird. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, you're saying human babies are more like the altrul or whatever. They need to be fed, but
Mhm.
it goes beyond that.
Well
As we
beyond
already
that.
discussed, they need to feel the bond.
Yes.
They need to be taught how to deal with their needs and their feelings,
Right.
how to manage their emotions.
Yes.
And babies can get stressed out.
Oh, yes.
That's our segue.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to my article
Okay.
because this whole thing about cry it out, this is so controversial. Um, and of course, I come against it. So, and I'll tell you why. So, okay.
Okay, now, wait, so take a look at your notes here.
Yeah. Okay. So we have secure attachment, we have insecure attachment. There are three types of insecure attachment. I'm going to define them and then I'll talk about the cry it out thing. So there is avoidant, or what is sometimes called anxious avoidant. I've also seen it called dismissive. And this is the type of insecure attachment. Children with an avoidant attachment tend to avoid parents or caregivers, showing no preference between a caregiver and a complete stranger. If you ever had a child who you don't know walk right up to you and you're able to pick up that child and hold that child, and the child shows no distress over the fact that you're a complete stranger and you've picked up this child, that's a clue that we have an avoidant attachment style. So they don't show a preference between their caregiver and a complete stranger. This can be a result of abuse or neglectful caregivers. Children who are punished for relying on a caregiver will learn to avoid seeking help in the future. So
Right. So if the child is made to feel that they are a burden,
that they are a burden, or they're just if the parent responds in anger toward to the neediness of the child because the parent is stressed out for some reason, that can, there are a lot of reasons why children develop this avoidant attachment style. But the fact is, they tend to not show any real preference for who their caregiver is. I'm going to cough now. Sorry. I'm still having residual symptoms. Okay, so the other insecure attachment is ambivalent, or what is sometimes called anxious ambivalent or distracted. So these children will become very distressed when a parent leaves. The ambivalent attachment is considered uncommon, affecting about 7 to 15% of kids. And this is a result of poor parental availability. These children just simply cannot depend on their primary caregiver to be there when they need them. Okay. So the avoidant attachment, the anxious avoidant attachment is going to lead to failure to thrive, or can lead to failure to thrive if it in its extreme form. Okay. And the ambivalent attachment can lead to what's called shutdown syndrome. Okay. So I've seen both of these actually in infants where the cry it out method is being employed. So I want to just bounce to that real quick and kind of talk about, can you go up to the top of the article real quick here? So, okay. So cry it out is described by various authors. One that's been really popular for a while is On Becoming Baby Wise. There's the Ferber method. There's various, books and methods that kind of describe this thing. But the basic idea is that you're using controlled crying, okay, as a way to train your baby to essentially be more independent or not need you. And the problem with this is that new babies cannot be trained to not need you because they just need you. They need you to be responsive, okay? When you're a new mom and you're sleep deprived, the thought of getting the baby to sleep through the night, it can become kind of an obsession because being sleep deprived is really painful and it's distressing, and you're exhausted. And so, there's a big temptation to want to get into this mode of like teaching the baby to not need you so much. But it just simply can't be taught. Okay. What is taught though, with this controlled, picking certain times where you avoid meeting your baby's needs, is that you're teaching the baby to shut down. Okay. So let's see here. I'm sorry. Can you scoot me up a little bit? I just want to pull out something here. Keep going. Okay. Keep going. Sorry. Okay, so Dr. Sears is a pediatrician who has done quite a bit of writing on this idea of attachment theory and attachment parenting, specifically as it relates to infants, but and beyond. And what he says is babies who are trained not to express their needs may appear to be docile, compliant, or good babies. Okay. They're not spoiled, as the old folks would say, right? Yet these babies are very likely depressed, who are shutting down the expression of their needs. And they may become children who don't speak up to get their needs met. And they will eventually become very high need adults. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, you know, what I think what it boils down to for a lot of people is, does the baby need me too much? And, you know, we have an unrealistic perception of what a baby's needs should be at any given time, you know, during this infancy. And with the lack of support and mothers needing to go back to work and the breakdown of the family situation, we're kind of in a really bad space when it comes to helping infants develop this very important, you know, healthy and secure attachment. So
yeah, and just to be explicit about a theme you keep bringing up, I think, is that it's like, you know, a 6-week-old baby there's expectations at this point mm-hmm. by some people put on a 6-week-old baby that a 6-week-old baby just can't do, and they're the expectations that you would have for someone who's much further along in development. Mm-hmm. You know, they're 6 years old, they're 12 years old, they're 15 years old.
Yeah.
And you're looking to a 6-week-old to be like that.
Yeah.
To be independent of you emotionally, mm-hmm. to not be needy, and so forth.
Yeah, that's just totally unrealistic.
Yeah, and it just, hopefully just by me stating it makes it clear that there's something really absurd that's gone wrong.
Right.
That we would look, I don't know if you've been around 6-week-old babies lately, but they are just completely helpless.
Right.
They, in every way.
In every way.
I mean, not just that they need to be fed and so forth, and changed, but emotionally.
Right.
They are not complete yet. Mm-hmm. They're not ready to deal with their own feelings yet.
Yeah, and it's more than that. When you say they're not complete, I mean, babies are not born with fully developed brains.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so all your responsiveness toward that baby is helping they are developing their brain right then and there. Okay, and that's why, you know, for example, researchers at the Harvard Medical School's Department of Psychiatry studied the long-term methods of the cried out method, or the long-term effects, of the cried out method, and they found that parents need to recognize that having their babies cry unnecessarily harms the baby permanently. Okay, it changes the nervous system, so they're overly sensitive to future trauma. So, you know,
keep going with the quote.
Yeah. So also researchers have shown that infants who are routinely separated from parents in a stressful way have abnormally high levels of the stress hormone cortisol, as well as lower growth hormone levels. So these imbalances inhibit the development of nerve tissue in the brain. They suppress growth and they depress the immune system. Okay. You know, so letting babies cry it out by sleep or just not responding to them consistently during the day, it damages them permanently. And this, what researchers have found, and this is documented in the book I showed you earlier, is that it doesn't go away. It stays with them. It stays with you, you know.
Because basic aspects of your body / mental / emotional system, which should not be thought of as separate things, but as intertwined with each other. Basic aspects of that are actually still are still under construction. Right. When a baby is born.
Right. So what is shutdown syndrome? Okay, so what shutdown, what is really so when you let your baby cry it out, the first night the baby cries a little, you know, cries crazily and you know, you stay away, and the next night the baby cries a little bit less, and the next night the baby cries a little less, and finally by the end of the week you've done it. You've trained your baby to not need you at night. Well, what has actually happened is that the baby has shut down. The baby has not stopped needing. you. The baby just has simply shut down. Their system shuts down because they simply cannot stay. They just don't, they know that it's not going to get a response. It doesn't get a response. But what's interesting is that the cortisol levels stay high. So physiologically, so emotionally, what you're seeing feeling wise is they're not crying anymore. Internally, physiologically, their hormone stress levels are still high.
Right.
Okay, so they're still up, even though they're not showing.
Right. And this is back to the title of your article. This is someone victoriously saying, hey, I have a good baby because they don't cry when they have needs, But in fact, inside, the baby is completely, totally stressed out.
Absolutely. And children who lack this physical attunement, that are getting responses from their parents and parents who don't have the benefit of the physical attunement with their parents, they become vulnerable to shutting down direct feedback from their bodies. Okay, and we get everything from our bodies. We get our pleasure. We get pleasure from our bodies. We get pain from our body. All the things. So when we shut down, we don't just shut down the bad stuff. We shut down to joy as well.
And also the ability to detect people who are unsafe, dangerous situations.
Well, exactly.
All of that has to do with being able to be in your body instead of like shut down.
Right. So the third form of insecure attachment is disorganized attachment. So these children display a confusing mix of behavior. They might seem disoriented, kind of dazed. They may avoid or resist the parent. They lack a clear attachment pattern. And it's linked to really inconsistent caregiver behavior. Okay. In such cases, parents may serve both as the source of comfort and abuse. All right. And I have found that people who made it into my office who had pretty severe patterns of destructive behavior fall into this category of disorganized attachment style. And in reading about this for myself, I recognized myself in this. And as being a child whose parents, I didn't have a choice but to reach out to them for whatever I needed, but I was also very afraid of them because they were scary people, in one way or another. And that's a very challenging place for a child to be, anyway, so those are the main forms of insecure attachment.
Right.
Any
So
questions
let's
about
just
that?
review real quick.
Yeah.
So there's secure attachment,
Uh-huh.
which is obviously
Yeah.
the ideal.
Yeah.
And then I guess, let's see, two kinds of insecure attachment, and then disorganized is
Three kinds of insecurity.
Okay.
Yep.
3 kinds of insecure attachment.
Avoidant.
One is avoidant. The
Ambivalent.
second is ambivalent. A third is disorganized.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so just summarizing in my own words real quick, avoidant is going to come from consistently abusive or neglectful.
Yeah.
Ambivalent is going to come from the parent just not being around.
Well,
Sounds
there's
like, as one example. And then disorganized comes from a really confusing from the perspective of the child, random behavior. Sometimes my parent comforts me. Sometimes I'm afraid of them.
So let me just tell you.
Am I getting that right?
Well, let me go further. When a person grows up in an abusive situation and they grow up and they become a mother, okay, what I have observed in mothers who have a history of abuse is that their child's neediness induces rage inside themselves. Okay. And that is very distressing to be feeling, my kid is needing me and I am feeling enraged at my child for needing me. Okay. Now, most parents who've done some work or, they'll recognize this isn't normal and they'll get help. Right. And they'll reach out for help. They'll talk to friends about it. You know, they'll get a therapist, whatever, and they'll tease this out and try to figure out, you know, what's going on. Okay, but some parents don't get help and they just rage at their baby. Or if the baby reaches out to them for comfort, they'll slap the baby's hands away. This sounds really extreme, but it happens. Okay, it happens. You know, or maybe the mom is, you know, the mom has to work all the time. Maybe mom is going through a trauma. Maybe parents are going through a divorce, and so the parents are fighting with each other, and they're not focused on the baby.
Right.
And so
they're not being parents because they're kind of.
I mean, there's any number. You know, I'm not trying to point fingers at people and say, "Are you a bad parent?"
Right.
Because we all bring a lot of baggage into marital situations. You know, when a woman becomes pregnant and she does not have the support of a marriage commitment, that's a really stressful situation, and that results in inconsistent responsiveness to a child, and then that results in an insecure attachment to her child. Maybe the child's at daycare all the time and she can't be there for the baby. You know, I mean, there's you know, there's a lot of, you know, life happens to cause these kinds of attachment patterns. But I think the key thing to remember is that the need for attachment never lessens. Okay, it starts when you're born and it doesn't stop. You know, it follows you into adulthood. You know, once parents remain your primary attachment bond until you get married. And then marriage becomes one's primary attachment bond. And research suggests that insecure attachment has a negative effect on all your future relationships. So I think that, you know, in our streams, we've been talking about kind of diagnosing the problem or acknowledging various problems that are happening in society right now. You know, lack of family formation. We have just a disaster in the area of courtship and coupling and things, and we have marriages, people who don't know how to stay married once they're married. And I think that points to this. I think that people don't know how to stay married because of the kind of attachment that they're bringing into the marital situation. So let's see here. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I wanted to. So to piggyback on what I said in the last stream on Sex and Society, when I said that our body's biological instinct is to bond, okay? Our body's biological instinct is to bond during sex, okay? Well, children have a biological instinct to attach and to bond. They don't have a choice. They're going to bond in one of these ways, okay? And it is dependent on how we as parents are responding to them, okay? So, you know, whether the parents or caregivers are loving, whether they're caring, whether they're distant, insensitive, rejecting, abusive, children are going to develop a coping style based on their attempt to get something of their needs met. Okay. And they're going to do what works best for them in that situation. So a child who develops a disorganized parent or a disorganized attachment style is doing so because that is the very best chance of getting the most needs met in that situation. Yeah. So that's attachment. That's a lot of information.
Right. Well, we might respond to some of the questions where I think it'll
and then we can talk a little bit more.
Things out. I'm always thinking about young men who are looking towards marriage or freshly married, and what is the takeaway for them? Well, one is that if you want to support your new baby really well, top things you can do are support your wife being with that baby, especially when they're like less than a year old. That's an especially crucial time. Keep your wife from being in survival mode. I mean, I know it sounds cliche, but the old thing of being a good provider really counts. And being a good provider should not be confused with providing luxury.
Right.
Being a good provider in the sense we're talking about it here, that's crucial here, is allowing the woman to not be in survival mode so that she can be focused on meeting the needs of the new baby, which
Right.
is a very absorbing, right? I mean, it's not like something you can do with your spare minutes during the day.
Right.
To really take care of a newborn means that you are with them, you are responding to them, ideally nursing them,
Well,
sleeping with them, right? It is very absorbing. And so if your wife is struggling just to survive in other ways in terms of the dynamics of your relationship, in terms of material needs,
mhm.
then she cannot give the baby the attention that the baby really needs to form in a healthy way. Right?
Right. Well, I think I
Um,
want to use my own story just to kind of comment a little bit about these attachment styles. Um, One of the primary reasons that I decided that I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and be with my kids was because of my own childhood. I was at one grandparent's house or the other, which ended up being a severe mercy, actually. Um, or I was in daycare. And I didn't really spend a lot of time with my parents. And when I was with them, they were not being consistent and even being pretty scary sometimes.
mm,
So being with my grandparents was actually probably the very best thing that could have happened to me. Because my parents just were not capable of providing the kind of consistent, caring,
mhm.
safe environment that a human child needs in order to grow up with a secure, healthy attachment. And the reality is that I did not grow up with a secure, healthy attachment. By the time I was 9 years old, I was having panic attacks that would last 3 to 4 hours at a time. And what I mean is somewhere around the middle of the day in school, I would start to lose it. And I would have to go to the nurse's office. And I would sit there on a bed in the nurse's office and shake uncontrollably for 3 to 4 hours at a time. Now, there was violence in my home. There was drug addiction, alcoholism. There was, rampant serial adultery happening. I mean, it was a nightmare. It really, really was. And I was harboring all that in my body. And this is why the title of his book, The Body Keeps the Score, is so wonderful. I mean, it's just the truth, And what's interesting, um, I was in a foster situation briefly for a while, but I think the biggest fostering situation that I experienced was just being at grandparents' house. They would take us in when my parents just were not available or not having, being able to function at all. And then when they were functioning, then we'd be with them, even though they weren't functioning great. So, you know, the problem with just pulling kids out of abusive situations like that, because clearly I could have been pulled out of that home and put in foster care, is that as far as we know, a child's system doesn't just reset when it's moved to a safe environment. I mean, your
Mhm.
attachment becomes a part of your body. It's in you. It is
Mhm.
in you. Okay. Anyway,
Or your style of attachment.
it becomes it's a part of your brain and your body are forming as you're having this kind of attachment, as you're developing
Right.
this kind of attachment. So
Right.
I
It's not like
recognized,
you could just you know, we talked about four different kinds of attachments, secure and three unsecure.
right,
Don't think of it as like you just flip the dial from one to the other at will.
right,
It's too deep inside you to
right.
easily do that.
Now,
Not that you can't have healing when you come,
absolutely, yeah,
but it's not going to be instant.
right.
It's going to be slow. You're going to need to have trust built.
I just made a therapist appointment for next month. Okay. I am modeling mental health in my home here, because it doesn't just go away, and I think to take a step back from the very extreme situation that I was raised in, we have had a couple of decades here. I was looking at divorce statistics,
Yeah.
and right around the late 70s and into the 80s, divorce just spiked.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we've got about a generation or two of people my age and a little younger who have been utterly destroyed by divorce. I mean,
Yeah.
totally and completely traumatized. Their emotional, physical, psychological, spiritual care completely hijacked by their parents getting a divorce. And it's been extremely destructive. And what I hear from people in terms of how this has affected attachment and family formation is that they're just not forming families anymore. I mean, I can name, I don't even know how many people who they're just living together and they, for some reason, they just won't get married. It's just too scary to think of. The word marriage is just frightening, to them. Because if they get
Well,
married, then they could get divorced and then there would be this mess. And,
right. I mean, I'm a little bit less worried about that, as I've discussed. If people are essentially, they're married in the eyes of God, even if not in the eyes of the state or the church,
right,
that's still legit, and it still allows for that primary spousal attachment to
right,
form,
right,
and can even result in children in a stable environment who, maybe someday they find out that their parents aren't formally married, but deep down emotionally it doesn't matter because their needs were met, their mom was
right,
with them, all that good stuff, right?
right.
So I'm not so worried about that. It's just the literal no family formation at all,
Yeah,
right? Moms raising children on their
right,
own, or just not having children because they can't get a bond together that makes them feel safe enough to actually have a child.
right. So I think one of the things that the work before me that I had to do before getting married, and I've continued to do it beyond, is what kind of damage did I sustain and what is my attachment style, and to begin to work on that, to recognize the patterns that I have of either pulling away or whatever, which can be damaging to your marriage relationship. And so I think it can be helpful to think about and do reading on what kind of attachment style you have and what you're bringing into the marriage, and be doing work on that before getting into marriage. That's some of that personal work that you can do there that we talked about in the courtship stream. And then I have to say, because of my tendency to my attachment was either disorganized or avoidant. I'm very good at avoiding, which was very adaptive when I was growing up. It was healthy actually for me to develop an avoidant attachment style because that was how I avoided abuse. But taking that in adulthood, it becomes what we call maladaptive. And it's not conducive to a healthy relationship. And so I recognized once I had children and in preparing to have children that I really, really wanted to lean into all the things that would create the best chance for our children to develop a secure attachment with me and me with them. And that process of really leaning in and surrendering to the mundanity of motherhood, the dailiness of it, being, up to my ears in just meeting emotional needs and changing diapers. Honestly, it was a profoundly healing experience for me. I got to reparent myself through parenting my children, which is not to say that I was asking them to meet my needs. The very act of being home with them and meeting their needs helped cleanse away some of that damage. It was amazing. It's kind of a counterintuitive thing. I didn't expect to come out of that with my own personal healing. But I remember that each year that went by and each child we added was just another opportunity to go deeper with attachment and to be less afraid and less avoidant and all that. And I've been pleasantly pleased and really grateful for all these children, because being in a family, staying married, even when it's been hard, going ahead and being obedient to the conviction that I was feeling, to have all the children that we have, to really trust the Lord for that, has resulted in an amazing amount of healing in me. And that's phenomenal, So,
Let's do a lightning round if it's okay, Heather.
sure.
a little bit after the hour and just try to respond to a few of these. I'm
Okay.
trying to pick through, get somewhere I think they'll help us discuss, flesh out some things. Michael Castile says, have we mentioned at what age we stop letting the baby sleep in the same bed as them? I let me make a comment first, and I'll let you talk. I really think it's important to remember that we're not dealing with machines when we're dealing with little humans
Yeah.
or grown up humans. We're dealing with people who are organic and complicated and extremely different from other people, right? So I would be very careful about any kind of scheduling of children. This child should be doing this by 6 months, and they should be doing that by 2 years, and so forth. Children will. There's a great book by Thomas Sowell, who many of you know as an economist, but he had a late talking child. A child who he was really starting to freak out. He and his wife were freaking out because this child was not talking, and they were past the age they should be talking, right? And so he actually ended up really digging into it and writing a book about it. Very different from all his other books, coming out of his own personal experience. And I think one of the lessons of that book was, calm down. This is a thing that happens. It's a little unusual, but it is a thing that happens with some children, that they just don't talk on the schedule that everybody expects them to. And what typically happens, sometimes there's neurological damage or something, but what usually happens in these cases is someday they just suddenly are like talking in whole sentences. They just like jump and boom, they go from not talking to just fully talking, and they're fine. And as time goes on, the memory becomes a little distant that they were a late talking child, and it doesn't really matter. Similarly, that some of our children stayed in sleeping with us a little bit longer than others because of their personality or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, Heather probably has it in her head, but I don't even remember like how long each child co-slept with us.
I do.
They
I
were,
do have it in my
I know,
head.
but the point is, it varied based on the personality of the child, based on other babies we had just had.
Right.
All kinds of things caused it to vary, and it's okay. They're okay. Right? We didn't have to have like, it's got to be like this, or it's.
Well, okay. So when you're attuned with your baby, you're gonna know what their needs are. I don't know. I mean, I know you're not saying with what you just said that there aren't any general guidelines for development. But there are.
Right.
There
No,
are guidelines.
what I'm
I mean,
pushing back,
people can-
what I'm pushing back against is that I'm afraid that people get just. There's a lot of tendency, especially because of our school system, to be like, this has got to happen at this age, and this has got to happen at that
Right.
age.
Yeah.
They've got to be on the schedule, or
Yeah.
something's wrong, and they go. We got to freak out.
No.
But children just vary. They learn to read at wildly different ages.
Oh yeah.
Some children are reading at 5.
Some are reading at 3.
Yeah, or 3, and some aren't reading until years later.
No. Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter in the end.
Yeah, you can kind of relax about those sorts
Yeah,
of things.
yeah.
I would say if a woman is breastfeeding, then co-sleeping will go longer than if a woman is not breastfeeding, because it's just easier to meet that need. And breastfeeding isn't just about the child's hunger. Your body, a woman's body who is breastfeeding, is in sync with her child. Literally, the amount of breast milk that her body makes is in sync with the demand of the child.
Yeah,
So
it's amazing.
And the breast milk composition changes as the child ages. Okay, so the kind of breast milk that a woman's body is producing for a newborn does not have the same fat content and composition that a breast milk at say age 1. Okay, so we chose to do child-led weaning. Which is to say that I generally just allowed the breastfeeding relationship to kind of putter out naturally. Now, typically we had a new baby by the time the older baby was around 2 years old, and then I would do tandem nursing for a little while. So if the 2-year-old wanted to nurse maybe once a day, then I would let them nurse, usually at bedtime. And then the newborn would be nursing all the rest of the time. And then usually right around 2.5, that older baby would stop nursing. They were just too busy. They were wanting to live a different life, rather than being dependent on mom for nursing. And then at that time, they were then handed over to dad. And dad would rock them to sleep and all that. And so we had just kind of like an assembly line, a baby get to a certain age, then it comes to dad. And I think with the twins, things have happened a little later, simply by virtue of the fact that they are the youngest. We didn't have any other
And there's
babies
no more
after them.
babies. Yeah, sort of forcing the issue.
Right. But, children who have a nightmare, I mean, they can be as old as 7 or 8 or something, wanting to crawl into bed with you because they're scared. And that's perfectly normal. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think we have this again, I don't know where these ideas came from, but we have this strange idea that everybody should be in their own bedroom, isolated from everybody else. And that's really not how families have functioned for like thousands and thousands of years. It's a very modern idea.
Yeah.
That you're separated from your children in this very strange way.
Yeah, I would admonish people in our circles how they are sensitive to this issue of rejecting tradition in favor of some newfangled thing that they just made up. And I just admonish you to take that good instinct to this area.
Yeah.
And think about, when you see pictures of third world moms with their babies, what do you see? Their babies are strapped to them.
Baby
right?
wearing.
They're wearing their baby, right?
All the cool ladies do it. I'm just kidding.
But the point is, we talk about return to tradition, right? I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Absolutely.
Here, you probably are going to do better off, even if it's not perfect, just kind of doing what people used to do and ignoring like the last 100 years plus of ideas about child development.
I found that
parenting.
wearing our babies made it so much easier for me to meet their needs quickly. Remember I said that crying is a late sign of hunger?
Right.
There's really, if the baby, I knew when the baby was hungry and we were feeding within moments, and so there just wasn't a need. The baby spent a lot less time in distress, and therefore I was not in distress because I was meeting my baby's needs. And with every baby, then there was confidence was being built in myself.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to minimize the long-term effects here. The kind of attachment that you develop as a child, you do bring into adulthood with you. And so if we're going to have a secure bond with our other primary attachment figure, namely your spouse. And I remember when you found out that the spouse was a primary attachment figure. And
yeah, that blew my mind.
Yeah. You want to talk about that? Or
I just it is, I think it's good, as we have here, to understand the primacy, the foundational nature of your relationship to your parents, to your mom when you're a little baby, especially. Having said that, I think that showed me that I had fallen off a little too much on one side of the horse there. I didn't realize that this wasn't just a thing that happens when you're little with your mom. Attachment, bonding is a part of being a human.
Yes.
Your whole life. And in particular, marriage, which, we have all this mystical stuff and talk, in Christianity, we talk about marriage as a mystery and all this. Okay, it is really kind of amazing, because what we're saying here is that the bond between spouses is on the same level in important ways as the bond between a mother and a newborn baby.
Yes.
It's that deep, intimate, foundational, physical. It's in your body. And I've talked about this on other streams we've had, the feeling of when we got engaged and I felt like something coming out of me and enfolding you so that we were now like part of one.
Right.
And it happened right away before we were formally married, before we had sex. I already had felt this connection that was physical and spiritual, and really profound, So, I think if we had that view of the bond between spouses, we would not be so light about divorce, for example.
Right.
We would take it more seriously to support other people's marriages. Just like you would not want to see a baby taken from its mother, right? You would fight against that. You would fight to support being able to keep the mother and child together. I think we should kind of have that kind of thing here.
Yeah, fighting to keep marriages together.
I wanted to hit more questions, but we're going to have to answer them more briefly.
Okay.
This isn't even a question. I just wanted to share it. A Walrus. Where I live, maternity leave, he's in Europe, can last up to 1 year, and still many mothers opt to reduce work hours or outright quit even after that.
Wow.
It's a telling statistic, but of course ignored by the money power. So he's just supporting the point I made that the corporations are not in reality about the mother-baby bond. Okay, I had another one queued up. Christine Creamer. What age range are you focusing on? What do you see as differences in an older baby or young toddler? When or if does some degree of self-soothing become good? Can you respond briefly? That opens a can of worms.
A newborn should never. A newborn baby, 3 months and younger, should never be left to self-soothe. And I think that we need to think about baby, infant times as you have 9 months in the womb and 9 months out. I don't think a mother should separate at all from her baby until after 9 months. When that is when baby begins to separate from the mom naturally. In other words, it's right around that time that babies will start to crawl or move away from mother on their own. That is when mother should be separate from the baby. But before that, I don't think mothers should be separated from their babies ever. And I know that that's not how our culture and our society is currently set up. And I think that is part of the reason why we have such dysfunctional relationships with dating and hooking up and sleeping around. And, promiscuity is, the insecure, the anxious, ambivalent, and disorganized attachment patterns. Those are the two patterns that we have
out
in promiscuity.
Played out as a young adult.
Absolutely.
Okay, Matrix Explained hits a little hobby horse of our families, and my daughter already responded. I just wanted to read it out real quick.
Is Madeline watching? Oh.
My problem is at 6, 7, 8 years, etc. When I remember I was looking for an adult to teach me reality, they told me Santa was real. How can I now trust you ever again for a lie so stupid and egotistical?
Oh, I remember.
And Madeline, our daughter Madeline, says people don't talk about how messed up the Santa thing is.
Yeah.
That's a theme.
One of our children, oldest. When I explained to our kids, because we did not do Santa, when I explained to our kids about how some parents lie to their children, my oldest got so upset about this that she actually did a campaign against Santa, wrote up flyers and wanted to put them around the neighborhood, campaigning like she was going to protest on the street against parents lying to their children. I completely agree with you.
Ryan Young says, I didn't really have a family in the traditional sense, so it blows my mind when people argue against families.
Yeah.
You want more psychos.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Sorry. Okay.
I can relate.
Matrix Explained says, so in your analysis, how does a parent prepare their child to be an adult? Well, hopefully everything we've been saying is the answer to that question.
Yeah.
When you have a child that is securely attached,
right,
that you have helped them to process their feelings, to ask for help when they need to ask for help, etc. They are now ready by having that security. Okay, sorry. Let me use an analogy or an example. When a child is secure, then not when they're 3 months old, right?
Yeah.
But when they get to the point where they're starting to walk on their own and stuff, they will start to move away from mom.
Yeah.
And they might look back at first, right? She's still there? Everything cool? But they'll build confidence, and they'll more and more start to venture out and explore the world, because of course there's a natural curiosity. You don't have to give children that. You just have to not destroy it. It's just there. And they will start to explore the world, and they will do it from a platform of security.
Well, I think...
And that is how you create an adult who is able to be successful, who is able to take on challenging, stressful, stimulating situations, to use the technical term, and be able to handle it.
Yeah.
because
Absolutely.
they have that firm foundation. Whatever they do, they're climbing a mountain, they're
Mm-hmm.
doing so, taking on a risk, whatever it is, inside themselves, in their body, they have a sense of stability,
Yes.
security.
Yep.
Things are okay,
Yeah. So
right?
securely attached kids, they operate from a position of trust. They trust that if they mess up, they're going to be able to come back to their parents and process it with them. They trust that you know they have some control over their environment. They're going to be able to say how they feel, and that they're going to have that responded to, and they're going to seek out spouses who respond to them in the same way. In other words, they're going to seek out a spouse who is also responsive, who offers them a secure attachment back in return. That's what's going to feel normal and familiar and healthy to them. Whereas people with insecure attachments, one of the biggest issues that I saw in my counseling practice, and even with myself before I addressed it, is that people who've been traumatized, will reenact that trauma in relationships. Okay, so they're going to seek out the bad boy who reminds them of their dad, who's going to be abusive to them, because we gravitate toward what is familiar to us. So it takes a concerted effort to recognize those attachment patterns that are no longer adaptive, that are now maladaptive now that you're an adult, and to address those and process those. And there is therapy that is out there to deal with this. But I think this is where the role of fathers is just so important. Okay, as one psychologist put it, mothers stroke and fathers poke. Okay, mothers were the ones who the kids could come to for comfort and warmth and all that, and dads were the ones who were out there challenging their children to go further. Go ahead and jump off that rock
Right.
into the water.
So A. Walrus says you talked a lot about the mother-child bonding. What about the father's role in
Yeah.
this? And then he says, think you're answering my question right now because I
Absolutely.
was talking about providing a safe environment and
Yeah.
everything. Well, I was focusing on the early
Yeah.
part. Heather's now bringing it past the very early stages where the baby is mostly with mom and the father's role is just to protect and provide so that mom and new baby can be safe and just do what they need to do,
Absolutely.
which is meet the needs of this helpless little child. But then even when the child's 1 year old and even more after that, the child starts to want to be a little more adventurous, and the dad is like throwing them up,
Throwing them up in the air,
balancing them on their hand.
Steven's thing was to balance babies on his hand.
That kind of goes back to my dad.
We can show pictures.
Yeah,
Can I
yeah.
show a picture real
Sure,
quick?
sure.
Okay, I made a collage of Steven balancing our babies. Okay, how do we show this?
Yeah, this is less than 1 year old. Yeah, there you go.
He's actually balancing them.
So here we go. All the children. And the twins at the bottom.
He's balancing them on his hand. And it freaks people out so much.
I don't know if you
But
could see in the
what?
pictures, but the babies were having a great time.
But you know what? He's the dad, okay? And he was doing the little risk-taking thing, and he needed to do that because that was how he was relating to his children, and we need to let dads be dads. We need to let men be men with their children, okay?
Okay, a couple more things I want to hit.
Nothing toxic about that.
Right. Okay, yeah, I really want to speak to this based on a talk that Alexander Adams gave at the UK event. A. Walrus says, discussion with my wife and the concept of leaving it up to God as she's from a divorced home. Why would I build our marriage with the expectation that we're going to get a divorce at some point? Yeah, this is a difficult issue, but I want to
You mean leaving it up to God whether your marriage succeeds?
I don't know, but let's just focus on that second question. Why would I build a marriage with the expectation that we're going to get a divorce? Yeah, so Alexander Adams gave a great talk at the UK event 2 weeks ago now, where he was talking about it from the point of view of being an artist, but he talked about how you've got to be committed. You have to let go of the ironic get out, the ironic escape hatch that lets you go, yeah, well, okay, you didn't like my art, but I didn't really mean it. It was a joke or something. He says, no, you've got to go all in if you're going to create good art, right? Well, you've got to take risks. You've got to step off the safe thing and let yourself potentially fail, but take the risk. Well, I'd say that's true with marriage. recognize, work on your issues, recognize if you've got an attachment style that's unhealthy and try to make it better. Form healthy bonds, recognize that you're a sinner, your wife's a sinner. You're going to be disappointed in your spouse more deeply and more distressingly. You're going to be disappointed in yourself because marriage brings all your issues out.
It really does.
It really exposes. It exposes. But I love this from a great therapist. He said, love brings everything unlike itself to the surface, so it can be dealt with. Right. So it is a challenging process, but you will get the most out of it if you go all in. You commit. You don't leave a hedge. You say, no. We are going to commit to each other, and we are just going to get through this. We're going to ask for help when we need it, but we're not going to give up.
Yeah.
That's just the only way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is Madeline saying? I don't know.
I don't know what she was responding to. There was one more I wanted to. Yeah. Okay. Nathan Hood. How do you change your attachment style?
Wow.
Let's end with that one.
Okay.
Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah.
Excellent question to wrap this up.
Well, I think that you begin by recognizing.
Change it to a better one. I'm assuming, Nathan, you don't want to change to like a worse attachment.
Of course
style.
not.
Anyway.
As I shared candidly, my childhood was very distressing, and I recognized pretty early on that I was going to bring with me some anxiety and some maladaptive kinds of behaviors rooted in an insecure attachment style. And I think the biggest thing for me was educating myself, recognizing which attachment style seemed to fit me. And if it was an insecure attachment style, reading up on that and trying to understand myself better. And then in various cases, Stephen and I both have sought out the advice and wisdom of counselors of various kinds. Spending that time to do that work of undoing, the patterns of behavior that were causing me further damage. Because, when you have an avoidant attachment style, if you do happen to get married and you're just avoiding any conflict, you're avoiding really bonding, that's not going to make for a long-lasting marriage. And if you happen to find someone who did marry you, even though you were like that, it's going to make it very difficult for the marriage to last, because it's lonely to be in a marriage like that. And that feels distressing. Our desire is to bond. What our body is wanting to do is bond. And so staying in that place of continuing to be avoidant becomes unhealthy. And so humbling yourself and being willing to examine yourself and seek out counseling, I think, is very, very important. And as I said before, having children was a profoundly healing experience for me. I was very scared to have children. I was so terrified that I would be the kind of mother that my mother was. I really was scared of that. And I am decidedly not the kind of mother that my mother was. And I think the reason for that is because I took what seemed like very unromantic steps toward ensuring that I would be in a stable, secure marriage. Mm-hmm. I asked questions that were unromantic rather than just getting involved physically and emotionally and letting that whirlwind high be the thing that drives me into questioning, do I really want to marry this person? I asked do I want to marry this person before getting physically involved, before we were taking that step to be physically bonded. So I think that as you perhaps those of you who've been watching our streams can begin to maybe put a bigger picture together. What we're talking about are all these elements that are necessary for forming a healthy, stable, structured family. Okay. And I think what's really lovely is that just being a part of a family, just having the stability has brought healing to both Stephen and I. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that I was willing to do the work and not respond in a dysfunctional, abusive way to my husband gave him the space to heal from the things that he needed to heal from. The fact that he chooses to not respond in a mean or accusing, dysfunctional, abusive way to me when I'm maybe being more avoidant or what, going into my more familiar attachment pattern. You know, we're not insecure. Okay, we know where our security comes from. It comes from the Lord. So if each one of us is responding in a way that is distressing to the other, it's not the end of the world. We don't go, oh well, maybe our marriage is over because we haven't talked this week because we've been mad
Mm-hmm.
at each other. We are able to come from a place of giving each other grace and allowing for changes to happen. And I said this before in our stream on courtship. The person that you marry may not be the same person 20 years later down the line because you
Mm-hmm.
allow for growth and change. And I would say that having children, I think, was and being married and staying in the marriage has been the key thing for me in healing. I had to go against what I was raised with. I had to stop avoiding. I had to stop. Um, I had to lean into. Excuse me. I had to lean into attachment, even though it was terrifying for me. And that became the catalyst for healing. So.
Okay, and I want to answer in my own way. First of all, this fits very nice with what you were just saying. The Matrix Explained says having a child makes us human.
Mm-hmm.
There's some real truth in that.
Yeah.
So let me speak for myself to Nathan's question, which again is, how do you change your attachment style,
Yeah.
right? How do you change your attachment style? So, I had what my counselor taught, and I've talked about this before. My counselor called neglect as a child, um, and I did this, well, accidentally. I mean, the Lord provided, right? I did this not consciously, but I would encourage you to do it consciously. I got married to Heather, and I didn't realize what I was doing until later. But for the first time in my life, I was in a home that was a loving home where I had a secure bond. Namely, Heather created a loving home, and she and I had a secure bond, even though I didn't even know what was happening until later, until it sort of soaked in. Um, but you don't have to be so unself-conscious as I was about it. I counsel men sometimes, um, especially young men, create the kinds of bonds in your life that will allow you to change your attachment style.
Mm-hmm.
So I think particularly good for young men to form relationships with older men.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a grandfather. Maybe it can't be someone from your family because
Mm-hmm.
the nature of your family. That's okay. The Lord will provide. Maybe it's an older man at church, a mentor, a professional mentor, even someone in your work life. Find people who are steady.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it might feel unnatural because of your own upbringing, lean into that.
Mm-hmm.
Lean into those steady attachments and spend time with those people.
Mm-hmm.
If you have people who are duplicating trauma from your childhood
Mm-hmm.
by being as crazy as you grew up with, it's hard, but see if you can find a way to have less of that in your life.
Yeah.
And more of the kind of connection that you want to
Mm-hmm.
learn how to do. Just, it's gonna not feel natural.
Mm-hmm.
Just make yourself do it.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a really hard
and
one.
and you may need help, because it's so deep in our bones, it's hard to know how to get out of this.
Mm-hmm.
You may need advice from others, trusted others, counselor, pastor, whatever. What are the good relationships in my life? What are the
Mm-hmm.
ones where I should really be focusing my time, and what are the ones that I should be kind of getting away from? Change the attachment environment. I talked about that the early church, it grew because people found themselves attached to Christians. I'll tell you a little bit more from my talk. These Christians had a track record of caring for the sick when the pagans would run for the hills.
Yeah.
That was one of the big things I focused on in my talk.
Yeah.
And over time, that paid off.
Yeah.
Pagans found that they wanted to be attached to the people who were caring, and they became Christians, and they in turn served others.
Yeah.
And it grew and grew, a network of secure attachments of people meeting each other's needs. Right. Make yourself part of that, so that more of the attachments in your life are that kind of attachment, that kind of bond, and then you're going to set yourself up for slowly but surely changing your attachment style and changing what feels natural, because it won't feel natural at first. If you've grown up with one of these insecure attachments, it'll feel weird.
Yeah.
But that's okay. You'll give yourself time, and you will grow to it, because it's what we want deep down. We want to have secure attachments. We want to have people who respond to our feelings and our needs and respond to them in turn. Right?
Yeah. It was really deeply healing for me when people in the church just initiated being around me. For example, I think it's been like 4 years. A dear friend that Stephen actually grew up with, but I didn't meet until I became a Christian and started coming to the church. She recently initiated coming to visit me once a week. I was going through a time of just really hurting from some losses, and she started coming every Thursday, and she just never stopped. She's been coming every Thursday for about 4 years now. And just
And there's an older woman who's able to be a mentor to you.
Yeah, and she's someone that I can talk to about anything and everything. I mean, really anything and everything. And she has just made herself emotionally available to me. She knows I don't have a mother, and she just has kind of stepped in as a surrogate in many ways, but not just a surrogate mother, a friend, and a grandmother to my children, maybe an auntie to my older children. And then when I was younger, in my early 20s, I was living alone. A mutual friend of ours, the Millers, he would just, the father would just call me up and say, hey, can I just come over and check your car? And I'm like, I remember the first time he did it, and I thought, check it for what? Because I had never been fathered in this regard. And he said, just check the oil, make sure the tires look okay. And I was like, yeah, that would be great. Thanks. And then he just did it.
Yeah.
And he didn't ask for anything in return. He just saw that there was a need. And he also they lived near me. And so, and then I started going over there for dinner a couple times a month, every Wednesday, and they just stepped into the void. They just stepped into that place. So maybe you're a person who has a secure attachment and you feel like you can give out of the riches of your stability. Do it. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do. I mean, we're not in a perfect marriage. We're trying, but we're committed, and we fight with each other. But we have enough stability that we can be generous. We can, have people over and visit and be hospitable. And I just love that. I find that healing for me too, to be able to give out of that place,
Yeah. And have the humility to recognize that, wouldn't it be nice to be a mentor to someone? Maybe you're just not at that place yet, and you're at a place where you need to really receive right now.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
If that's where you're at, that's where you're at. And that's the step you need to take so that you can give back someday. But for now, let the Lord provide, and be open, be looking for it, and someone will come along, and you can receive from them and eventually be a blessing to others. Right? Okay, well, I think that covers it.
Well, there's a lot more to say in terms of
Yeah.
marriage bonding, and maybe we'll talk more about
Yeah.
that at a later time. I don't want
Right,
to,
but you needed to lay the groundwork
just
of
groundwork.
the different kinds of bonds.
Yeah, and we hadn't we missed last month, so I wanted to make sure to get back in here and visit with y'all. And now my daughter and I are getting ready to go to a gala
Yeah.
for urban farmers.
Urban farmers.
Yeah,
That's gonna be cool.
it's going to be fun. So
Yeah. Oh, one of the resources that my wife kindly provides with the support of our friend Luke, Lambda, who goes by Lambda, is that there is a Discord channel on the Lambda video. It is in the description,
Yeah.
and it is a safe place where you can come and talk more about the topics we raise on this channel or whatever.
Yeah.
And Heather tends to be very active there and responsive to people. So, how many videos on YouTube do you watch where you get to have follow up like that? So, I recommend for you to take part in that. It's called the mrs-radlib-channel.
Yeah, and if your question is personal, I've in several instances said, "Hey, why don't you DM me instead, and let's take this off into a more private place where we can, because people are sharing personal details and whatnot."
Yeah, and also worth noting that there is a gals channel that is only for women, where another kind of conversation. I mean, that's not like your channel,
Yeah.
but it's a gals channel on the Lambda server, and Heather participates in that as well. I know that in the online spaces, sometimes women are, one woman to 99 men. So here's a place where you can just talk to other women and get some some sort of private counsel in that way. So really great resources that I recommend to you. Okay. Well, we better stop because I've got to go get shopping done
Oh,
while
right.
Heather goes
Yeah,
off to the
he's
gala.
taking care of the shopping while I do the gala. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. And we will talk to you in about a month.